Welcome to Older Military Radio TV, and we're lifelong Catholics. And we'll do this all for free and for our love of Jesus Christ and for our Holy Mother, the Church. And we'll defend our Holy Mother, the Church. We have Brother Alexis on from the United States. He's touring our land. And today we're going to be talking about a few other things, mostly on discernment. So, welcome, brother.
Thank you, AJ, for having me on Order Militaris Radio TV. We're close to starting, I think, our third year, or is it fourth year? I forget how many. We're fourth year. Third year. Well, starting the fourth year in June. So we're close to that. So this is something new because we haven't done a program totally from the United States. So you're in Kansas. I'm currently in Massachusetts. As you can see, we're getting ready for a snowstorm here. And this is going to be a new program. We're going to do a little catechesis, a little news about the order. It's going to be less formal, more talkative. So maybe we can work towards getting call-ins one day and getting the audience to participate. But if you share these programs, we're going to get a bigger audience, and that will help us build the studio and do a lot more things. So just don't keep the truth to yourself. So AJ has thought up this wonderful new series, and he has all these questions. So let's go with it, AJ.
So before we begin anywhere, what is discernment?
Okay, so we're Catholics. So when we talk about discernment, we talk about how to distinguish one thing from another, the right path from the wrong, good from evil, honest from inhonest, what to do. Even if you're not Catholic, if you're a rational person, you understand that you have to have discernment. If you're getting your car worked on and you need to get your car worked on, you're visiting different mechanics, and you don't have the foggiest idea to determine if a man's honest or not, you can't pick up any, silent signs, his facial expression, his hand signs, which might indicate that what he's saying to you is not true. If you don't know anything about cars, you don't know even what needs to be fixed if he's telling you the truth. And if you don't know the price of auto parts, you don't know what he's charging you is even true. So the prudent man goes to many mechanics and gets the estimate. It's going to tell him what's wrong with my car and how much it's going to cost. And generally speaking, the majority of voices are going to be the sure thing, unless you run into one mechanic who is famously correct and well known about your make and model car, and he tells you, no, those other guys don't know what they're talking about because this is the problem. You need to talk to some friends, people in the community. You gather all that information up before you're going to spend $5,000 fix your car. If you just go to someone you don't know and plop $5,000 down and leave your car there, it may never get fixed. You may never see your money or your car again. In some neighborhoods, you may not even see your car. So that's discernment. It's a work of prudence. And a lot of people don't have it because we're in a society where you press the button, it comes out of the vending machine. And on all kinds of, everything's designed that way because globalists don't want you to discern. They want you just to react. Just to react. Because if you just react, then they can control what you're doing. So this is just discernment on the natural level. We Christians use the word discernment in a much more important way. Is it right or wrong? And even higher than that, that's the moral discernment, is this the will of God for me? That's spiritual discernment, which is even more difficult. Now, each level of discernment requires a precision. It's like, if you have to chop a tree down, just take an axe. You don't need a precise instrument. You don't need a scalpel to carve down a tree, but you do need a scalpel to do surgery on the intestines, okay? Because one kind of work requires one kind of instrument and another requires another. So it's easy to have discernment to take care of your car. Anyone can do that. You don't even have to be Christian. You have to at least be rational and have a little prudence, a little self-interest in your car and your money and your personal safety. But when it comes to moral discernment, you can't do that unless you know what the moral law is. And where does the law of morality come from? It comes from God, because if it doesn't come from God, it can't be a law of morality. If you just live by whatever laws are passed by your politicians, well, today this could be legal and tomorrow that could be illegal. Today you have this right and tomorrow you don't. You would be going crazy because, 25 years ago you were allowed to do this and now you're not allowed to do this. So what's right and wrong? And if there was no God, how would politicians even decide what should be legal or not? They wouldn't be able to do it unless they have some ideology. That's why all politicians, this goes back to Aristotle. All law is founded on some belief in some God, because what's going to be the measure? So morality is the measuring rule of all human actions, and you have to draw your principles of moral action from your belief in God, in some divine eternal power that at least set the rules down. Maybe the easiest way to understand it is, if I have a Commodore computer and you have a tablet made by Google, a Google tablet. The instructions for your tablet I cannot use to fix my Commodore, and vice versa. Where do the instructions come from? The manufacturer. And why does the manufacturer have it? Because the people who designed it said these are the instructions. And we can use this as an analogy on matters of religion. If there is a creator, and there certainly is, then he's the one that's going to give the rules for the operating instructions, because he knows he made the thing. And this is why we don't understand really how best to make this plant grow or that animal reproduce, because we're not its creators. We have to sit there and study. Scientists have to study a single flower for generations just to know how it works and what's best for this flower, because we're not the creators. And we may, even with our own, look at human health, we still don't know how to cure all these diseases because we're not the creator of man. We don't know how it breaks down, even why. And we probably will never know completely, even if we had 1,000 millennia to do it, because we're not the creator. But God knows, because he made it. And in Christianity, thanks be to God, our God has told us what's right and wrong. And he told us in the 10 Commandments. He told us through the Old and New Testament. And so moral discernment is, which of these is right or wrong, I go back to God, what he has taught. And how is that passage in Scripture understood by the church, the saints, because they explained it. But how is the average Catholic, the average Christian, going to know that unless he studies? It's just not, unless you had good parents that taught you right and wrong based on those things. And that's usually how we have our basic knowledge. Dad said that's wrong. Ma says that's wrong. Ma said that's dishonest, and you remember those things. And that's kind of like your instant coffee version of morality. But once you become an adult, you really should pick up a book and read. You should at least read the Gospels, okay? And you should read the whole Bible. But if you don't, there are books on virtues and vices, making a good confession, and some books on discernment. But most books on discernment are so vague that they're really useless. If you ask a Catholic to decide to live for God instead of living for the world, flesh, and the devil, most Catholics couldn't even start that meditation, because they don't know they don't know that they don't know. There are men who think that lust is a good, healthy life. That's not what lust. That lust is not a sign of health. Even though it doesn't makes you a better man. People are all mixed up, so they have no discernment. They think that, well, as long as this priest is thinking, as long as I want to be a bishop, then I'm going to be a good priest. That's not proper discernment. And I'm a monk. I have many men who contact me over the years about wanting to be a monk, and I haven't met one who has the proper principle. I remember me talking to one guy, and he was like, "Yeah, I want to be a Franciscan monk." I said, "Do you go to church every Sunday?" "Oh, no, I don't go to church every Sunday." I said, "Well, you're not even in the beginning stage of Christianity. You should at least keep the Lord's Day." if you don't think that's important, there's no possible way that your decision to be a monk is from God. It's not even possible, because it's like, you know, you don't think diamonds are important and you want to visit a De Beers factory. It just doesn't make sense. Why would you want to do that? So, you're a vegetarian and you go to a steakhouse. It's like, what are you doing here? So, when it comes to moral discernment and spiritual discernment, you need to be very precise, and you have to go back to the rule book, and you have to be someone who lives the law. I mean, the Old Testament, the Jews are famous because Moses laid down the law that God gave him, and the law is contained in the first 5 books of the Bible called the Torah, and the Jews lived that. They followed all the law. There's like 270 prescriptions, and if you violate any one, you go to hell. And we Christians, we don't keep all those liturgical prescriptions, but the moral prescriptions that haven't changed. Sodomy is wrong in the Old Testament, it's wrong in the New. Murder is wrong in the Old Testament, it's wrong in the New. So the moral prescriptions hasn't changed, because the God who gave Moses the law is the God who was crucified on the cross and rose from the dead. It's Jesus Christ. But just because you call yourself a Christian or are baptized or even worship on the Sunday doesn't guarantee you know all these things, so that when it comes time for you to make a decision, you can practice discernment. So that's just the basic problematic. So, and this doesn't mean even that priests have good discernment. I can tell you in my entire life, I haven't met a priest alive who has as good discernment as St. Alphonsus Liguori explains in his books, okay, or John of the Cross in his books. And I always tell Catholics, you got to read these saints, because these men have discernment. Modern man doesn't have discernment because we're just flooded with lies. We're just soaked in a cultures of lies, propaganda, materialism, carnality, a completely Masonic worldview. If you ran into someone who thought like St. Alphonsus, you'd probably think he's a bizarre extremist, because you've never met someone like that. And even good Catholics, even bishops, even cardinals, even popes couldn't stand St. Alphonsus if he was around them. Okay, I'm talking about in the last 100 years. Before that, no, they made him a canonized saint because they understand they had discernment. But like, no one has discernment today. Everyone's just crazy and blind. So this is a really important topic. It's a lot more important than you can imagine. When you asked AJ, when you said this show is going to be about discernment, I said, that's right on. This is what we need. And we see this all the time, don't we? In Ordo Militaris, we try to propose a really high ideal to people. And what's the reaction and why?
They think we're crazy, nuts, doing something illegal. They called pretty much all the alphabet soup agencies on us, and now, well, if you hear road noise, you'll hear our listener.
Yeah. So because people just have no discernment anymore. They don't know. They're calling. We live in an age where they want to call men women, women men, or a right wrong, a wrong right. They want to call genocide justice, and self-defense in the legal war. They want to attack other nations and say people are attacking them. Because the morality is just all upside down. It's all up for grabs, and that's not proper discernment. That's madness. So this is something you can tell if you've ever been to a mental sanitarium, a hospital for the mentally insane. You'll meet people who have no discernment. They don't have supernatural discernment. They don't have moral discernment. They don't even have natural discernment. They have none of that. So they'll say they're Napoleon, or they'll want to drink out of a toilet, or they'll start urinating into their pea soup, because you're just totally gone. There's just nothing there left. And if you live without discernment, that's where you're going to head up. I know a man in Rome. I used to say hello to him every day on the bus when I was studying in Rome about 10 years ago. And I thought he was a rather nice man. I mean, I said hello to him. He said hello to me. Until one day I said to him, God bless. That was it. He went wild. He started screaming. He started like frothing at the mouth, and he was like, became an animal and just went crazy. And I had to move to another part of the bus because I figured he was going to hit me. So after he got off the bus, I said to a woman from the neighborhood, this man was perfectly sane and rational. He was very friendly to me. What happened? She goes, this is a man he was a philosopher, she said. His story was he was a philosopher, and he thought about the question whether there is a God or not. And he really didn't want that there be a God. And when he realized that he could not deny the existence of God with his mind, he decided to stop being rational. And he actually willed no longer to use his intellect. And he hated God so much that when I said, God bless you, that triggered all his rage. And this is a man who chose totally to reject discernment. I mean, he went against it in the most absolute way. I've never met someone who has that kind of strength of will, but he was extremely evil because he hated God. And he was so zealous in that he had to hate the ability even to discern right from wrong, you know. And the guy was just a drunk that lived on welfare, He had no other desire to life. So that's what happens when you reject discernment. But when you practice discernment, where do you end up? You end up in the beatific vision of God for all eternity, united to God himself, shining like the sun in the kingdom of Christ, and empowered by the divine omnipotence itself, so that from heaven you can come back to this world and help people in the things that really matter. That's where discernment leads, if you want to follow the path. And that's why Christ says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. That is a declaration of, look, if you want discernment, I'm your touchstone on that. You follow me, you listen to me, you put in practice my teachings, and you will arrive at the goal of discernment, which is always to find the better thing, the thing that is the good, not the evil, to avoid risks, and arrive at the most safest place.
Yeah. So, in our work with older militarists in Ukraine, then, yeah, pretty much both at once and everything else. We see these strategies, schismatics, so study vacantis come at us out of the woodwork with knives, and it's like they don't know. It's like they're following like the same thing that person that took over that man met on the bus. And like they want their own Catholicism, but with their own instead of what our Lord has given us. Then when we mention, go over there, help fight for the Christians over there, or go fight and help the Christians over there, they like.
Yeah, and how many stories have we hear of just common Joes or even Janes who left their family, their life, their job, and went to the Ukraine, helped out, or fought, and ended up dying? Okay, some of them aren't dying, and you wonder, like, well, these people weren't going to church 12 times a day or saying 50 rosaries, and yet they had better discernment than all these others because they saw what was right. They immediately gave up everything to do what was right, and they even risked their lives to do what was right for people they never even knew. I mean, that's the perfection of Christianity. And you have people who aren't even Christians who did this. So their natural discernment is extremely high level. And yet, we've been on 6 years, nearly 7 years now. Nearly 7 years. It'll be 7 years in August. Calling people to arms in the sense of calling them to come and to help defend Christians. And we've had maybe 3 or 4 people seriously talk to us about volunteering, but none actually volunteer. And I remark at this, I go, why is it the people use social media to have no discernment? And the people who have discernment are the ones that don't use social media. I haven't really figured that one out yet. Maybe you have some ideas, AJ.
Yeah. Like the guys who are volunteering with us right now. Only one is on Twitter, but he's currently off in the front lines. The rest are not on social media like most of Ukraine and other people over there. Like, it's like they are not. They're not controlled. They're not captive. They're able to think and decide what to do with.
Yeah, that's the first thing. So if you are sticking your head into the sewer of social media every day, then when do you have time to practice discernment?
Mm-hmm.
You're just pressing likes, favs, retweets, shares, and that's reacting on the level of an animal. It's not using
Mm-hmm.
your discernment. Uh, Social media used to have a lot more quality on it, but it's getting just more advertising and more just shrilling, calling names and stuff, or the silliest little argument. People don't react to anything unless it's objectionable. And so it doesn't surprise me that the people with true discernment just don't spend their time on it at all.
Mm-hmm.
AJ, you and I are on social media a lot because, well, I'm a monk, and so I don't hermit. I don't meet many people, and you're homebound. So this is
Yeah.
the only way we can get the message out. But if I was young and good health, and if you were in good health, we'd be doing stuff in the Ukraine. That's what we would be. We wouldn't be wasting time here.
Yeah.
Of course, these people who did go, they already had, because they had work jobs and saved their money. They already had the means to go, and it's absolutely sacrificial. I was surprised, and all these vets said they'd help out with with our crosses or charity in the Ukraine, and I met them in Kiev. I was like, what's your religion? Catholic, 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 but I'm not practicing Catholic. They were like all Catholic. I said, how is it that you all came here? So I was just talking to myself. AJ and I have beaten our heads on social media for 6 years to recruit guys that have this kind of discernment, and here they are, you know, in the war zone. They didn't even know us before I got there, and they. It's not like they don't follow us on social media at all. So, but they have discernment. So now to get back to what you said about the tradies, you're going to get totally mixed up in your Catholic life if instead of studying the scriptures, the doctrines of the fathers and the saints on the moral law, and the saints like John of the Cross or Saint Alphonsus on spiritual discernment, if instead of studying that, you just follow a narrative of some group or clique in the church, whatever it be, whether you're in a religious order or in a priestly institute, or you're a follower of them because you go to mass at one of their centers, you're going to get totally lost, because that's not Christianity. Christianity is not like being a football fan.
Mm-hmm.
When you're a football fan, you cheer for your team, you get the paraphernalia, you show the colors, you go to the games, and you scream and yell in favor of your team, and you boo the enemy. It's factionalism, but that's not Christianity, and that's not discernment. I mean, there shouldn't even be that kind of thing in the Catholic Church, but there is. And you have groups that say, well, I go to only the Tridentine Mass, and I have the breviary, and I have the missal, and I wear a beard and a jacket, and I smoke the pipe, and I only watch certain YouTube channels and read certain blogs, and I pay no attention to these other people because they're not tradies, and we'll be victorious when we have 12 more Latin masses in the diocese, and we have a bishop does only the Latin Mass because that's the true religion. And you tell them, 5,000 people are starving here, 10,000 people were injured in the war there. Can you offer them some help? What? Do they go to Latin Mass? No, I'm not going to help them. And even if they did, he wouldn't help them. I don't know one group of tradies in the entire world that help Catholics who are persecuted who go to the Latin Mass. Yeah, you have parishioners of this society has a mission in that country, send money to that mission to help build them a chapel. But you never hear them saving people from starvation in this country or homeless in that country if they don't go to the Latin Mass, because in their mind, the Latin Mass is the agenda. That's the religion. And that's not Catholicism. You can't even find Latin Mass mentioned in the New Testament.
Yeah. Yeah, reminds me of someone I learned about recently. The biker gang drug user turned Assembly of God preacher, Sam Childer. He's like, they already got an orphanage and a church and everything over here. But I don't care if they're Catholics or what. They don't have nothing across the border where there's war. Take me to where there's war. Let me see what these people need. He's like, okay.
Hmm. And all these men who have this kind of discernment, all these men and women who do this, they're living at a very high level of life. I mean, it's not only so a high human level, but the Christians are living at a very high Christian level of life because they're not living for themselves. They realize that there are things greater than themselves. There are ideals or causes that are truly honest that merit dedication of life. And they're not like organizing a party so they can spread Marxism or promote abortion or do some crazy thing, which they say, oh, this is the cause and we're going to sacrifice ourselves for it, like all these whacked out, evil people.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a high level of discernment. And the thing that's strange to them, they don't spend 10 years figuring out whether they're going to go to the Sudan. They hear the problem, they get on the plane, they go. They empty their bank account out and they go. And that is the most excellent, noble outlook. It's like all the great Catholics of history who are in your family, AJ, who saved Europe. They didn't sit around saying, well, the Moors are in Spain, they're invading France. What are we going to do this,
Yeah. I mean, the poor guy nearly wrecked his marriage because he was like, you're loving these kids more than our kids here and the people here. Because he's like, you haven't seen what I've seen. Then he's like, I'm selling the business. I can build, I can do this over there. So he sells the business, takes out money, reinforces the orphanage he built by hand with fences, security cameras, everything.
Mm-hmm.
Gets boots for the actual South Sudan Christian army over there. Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, now you got boots. And I mean, almost loses his family because they're getting, a little like, you're loving those people more than us loving him. And he comes back and darn near preaches what Blessed Urban II said at Claremont. And I was like, that guy is somebody God or Catholic.
Yeah, Blessed Urban II at he was a Frenchman, Eau-de-Vie de Lagery, and he only said he only said the Latin Mass. So where are all the tradies? Why don't they admire Urban II?
Yeah.
Why is the only tradie event going on a pilgrimage to Chartres, walking 25 miles, or it's 40 miles, I don't know how many miles it is, with a bunch of other young people and camping together and partying every night? Why is that traditional Catholicism? Why is the youth doing that? Why aren't they, wanting to go help Christians suffering in parts of the persecuted world,
Yeah.
where Christians are persecuted? So there's something really off the rails in modern Catholicism. And this goes back to Vatican II. Vatican II is an exercise in the absolute worst discernment you could possibly practice, And we could talk about that length in other shows. But once you get on the bandwagon of just folly rather than proper discernment, so what do you got there, AJ?
The reason why the Vatican II was so haywire.
Okay, John Courtney Murray's book Time, Life, and the American Proposition. Yeah. And we did a number of programs on that, and at Order Militaris Radio TV, and AJ can put a link on the page.
Yeah.
If you don't know what's in that book, you can't have proper discernment about what's the value of Vatican II. You'll get caught in the debate that, it's totally be rejected, it's all evil, and therefore the church is ended. Or the other time, you can't criticize it all. It's a magisterial council. It's infallible, and it's the way forward, and there's no reform but that. and those are the two false views of the council. But once you know where it really came from, then you know the right reason to just dump it in the garbage can, because it was all engineered by the CIA.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of their program to destroy the Catholic from the church from within. And if you're still on that narrative bandwagon, you're going to be destroyed. Or if you don't know the real reason where it came from and why it came, you're going to get on some other bandwagon the CIA has created. Because if we've traced it, all these social media personalities, a good number of them were never Catholic, or at one time, or their ancestors weren't Catholic, and they're claiming to defend Catholic views. They don't know the first thing about what it means to be Catholic. Most of my critics are people who have never studied theology and don't know left from right on it, and they want to go on social media and say, this Bugnola is wrong for that. Okay, I don't care you say I'm wrong, but when you start saying I'm wrong for saying that, well, that's what the saints said. That's the doctrine of the church. That's canon law. So that's what Jesus Christ promised. So if you're saying I'm wrong, be honest. Just say Jesus Christ is not God.
Yeah.
Just say the Catholic religion is false, and just say that lawlessness is honesty. Just come out and say it, But they're not going to say that, because then their little game, money, Catholic grifter collective game will be over. And this is a point of discernment too. Now, we don't have. There's not many people who watch Militaris Radio TV and social media, though you've had like 7 million views at your website. But it's not like these people who don't know the first squat about Catholicism have 95,000 followers on YouTube. Okay, Ordo Militaris on his channel on YouTube was canceled in, what was it, July this year?
Yeah. Because we decided to go after Vox and others in Spanish.
Yeah. So how is it that AJ's channel is canceled totally off YouTube? He had about 1,000 followers just because I shared a video in a Spanish forum on social media in Spain that showed that Vox was funded by a CIA organization, which Vox is a party in Spain that pretends to be conservative.
Mm-hmm.
But all these other people have never had their channels canceled. How is that possible? So use discernment. Is YouTube a friend of traddy Catholics? Real traditional Catholics, no. But why is it that all the traddy Catholics have YouTube channels and they've never been canceled?
Because they are actually agents or assets to the different governments around the world.
Well, that is, people use your discernment. It is an agenda of the CIA to divide the church and promote groups that cause unreconcilable differences. The CIA will give money, support, and recruit and promote any group that wants irreconcilable differences. So if you're in a traditional group that will never reconcile with any Catholics who aren't traditionalists, then you should ask yourself, is my group being supported by the CIA? Or if you recognize there's a truth greater than your little group that the whole church should accept, and then you would be reconciled, then the CIA isn't going to support you. And this is why AJ, Ordo Militaris Radio TV, and all that social media activity that we do in Ordo Militaris, we are constantly squelched, silenced, hidden, banned, and we have been for 6 years because we're Catholics. We don't think you should add any other word to that, We don't think the Latin liturgy is superior to the Greek liturgy. That would be absurd. Why? Because where does the liturgy come from? It comes from Jesus Christ. So who's ever authentically putting that liturgy into practice, that you're praying with Christ. It's one liturgy. There's only one liturgy in heaven, and it's not in Latin. It's not even in Greek, nor is it in Hebrew. Okay, it transcends language. Okay, so discernment is very, very important. If you don't practice discernment, you're going to end up defrauded, manipulated, and dead, impoverished, and you're going to be enslaved. And you end up, well, like so many Catholics in the West since the French Revolution. Our governments have been taken over by Masons, and they've started wars world wars, and they told us the patriotic thing to do is fight for us in this war, and then we go to death. And did we die for Christ? Or did we die for the Masonic Lodge? And if you don't know who is with Christ and who's against him, and you're going to be caught up in a narrative where you're going to give your time, your money, your life, your family, your reputation serving someone other than Jesus Christ, you know? And so the whole concept of patriotism, nationalism, of how you even vote. When it comes to vote, AJ, how are Catholics in the United States deceived when it comes to voting?
You see, oh, there's a difference between the conservative GOP, or the left-wing Democrats, or the Masonic Independent Party, when in fact, there isn't a difference. It was all created right when Yale and Skull and Bones was founded in 1833, and as how they played the game of saying, "Oh, we're different, left and right." But if you look at their personal Twitter accounts, not the official government accounts, but their personal accounts, you see each and every one of them hobnobbing at elite parties and joking, laughing.
We used to never pay much attention to that because we didn't use the discernment. But people started wondering, how is it that George Bush, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and Donald Trump are all at the same table?
Mm-hmm.
You know, if and how is it that when it comes time to vote, you have a lot of Catholic voices that say, no, don't look at anything else, but you got to vote pro-life. That's all you got to do is vote pro-life, and because the party that's pro-life is really the cause of Jesus Christ. Well, that sounds like a very convincing argument, except when you realize that the so-called party pro-life doesn't do anything that's pro-life once they get in office. They just put the pro-life up there to get your vote. But once they get in office, they don't do pro-life. People even praising Trump for overturning Roe versus Wade. Trump didn't overturn Roe versus Wade. Who overturned Roe versus Wade? Supreme Court justices who were Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
And on that issue, decided to put their faith into practice and practice proper discernment. And if you read that ruling that overturned Roe versus Wade, that's a masterpiece of Catholic jurisprudence. They went all the way back to your ancestors in the kings of England, AJ, and they cited laws from like the 11th, 12th, 13th century. If you read any Supreme Court ruling in the last 200 years, you would be hard-pressed to find another ruling even like it. And this is what's outraging the so many politicians in this country, because that's Catholic thought acting. That's Catholic discernment. Though I don't agree with everything in the ruling, nevertheless, it was light years different. It's a totally different genre of things. It's almost medieval prudence in the sense that it's Catholic. And if the Supreme Court justices went back to the 13th century to find principles to flesh out their argument, that's a big hint that if you want to practice proper Catholic discernment, you should be reading the lives of the saints from the Middle Ages, mm-hmm. or the lives of the great Catholic heroes of ancient times, because, maybe they had better discernment than modern times, where you just press a button and say like and fab. That there's something seriously wrong in modern times when people can't figure out what gender they are, even when they look down at themselves in the toilet. It's like totally lacking discernment. So here at Ordo Militaris, we're not promoting some nutty, crazy thing. We're promoting absolute Catholic sanity. We have never promoted anything but that. But those who won't even permit you to talk about Ordo Militaris Catholicus in their comm boxes, they have a big agenda, and they're very confused people, because we're not their enemy. We're just telling people the truth. And Catholics in social media really have to realize that you're being heavily manipulated. It's like 99% of this stuff is being manipulated. And even a lot of Catholic channels are manipulating you, because these people don't know what they're talking about. And then they're saying, no, that's not what I mean, I saw 4 people this morning who were saying, oh, these people outside the church. Well, I totally agree with those bishops too. I would say they're definitely headed out of the church, but I would never say they're out of the church because they haven't been condemned in a council. And it's not for you or me to say that person's not in the church. I mean, you're not the Pope.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And can you imagine your neighbor saying, you're not an American citizen? I don't care if you have a passport and a driver's license. You're not an American citizen because you're not an American citizen unless you're a member of my party. That would be outrageous. It would be considered absolutely intolerable. Okay. That would be worse than saying someone who's not an American citizen is one. Okay. So, because that would be conferral rights that he doesn't have, but a denial of rights that you do is even worse. So, yes, there are problems in the world, but you have to understand proper discernment. And that includes understanding who you are and what authority you have and being a little humble.
Yeah.
Humility is good discernment. Humility is like saying, I don't like things in town, but I'm not going to make laws. You may not like the mayor, but you wouldn't walk into town hall and say, you're not the mayor, get out. You'd be arrested.
Yeah.
So discernment is very important, and it is just so lacking. It's just, it's so lacking. People just don't know the principles of how to make a good judgment.
I mean, what was it? When I noticed something was off with Don Minatella, probably, right, a year, right when Benedict was showing something was wrong with him. And there was, you guys are doing the different conferences for Benedict, and I was like, he was speaking Italian super fast, but just not his body language, but something was off with him. I mean, just looking at the guy, just like,
AJ, you didn't have good discernment. I mean, most in the English-speaking world, we don't know much about Don Alessandro Minatella, who was pastor of St. Don Bosco Parish in Palermo, and he seemed very honest to me in many ways, but he has his own little agenda. He started showing himself to be, even the Catholics in Italy are complaining about this. Like he'd held a big conference in December of last year. I was at that conference, and there was mass, and you could receive communion, but he wouldn't allow any of the 10 priests who were present to hear anyone's confession. Well, who are you to tell the priests and the laity they can't receive the sacraments?
mm-hmm.
And if you're a church leader, do you want to forbid the sacraments or do you want to promote the sacraments? If you have a truly Christian pastor and an anti-Christian pastor, who's going to promote the sacraments? Which one?
Yeah.
And if you can't discern which one that is, so that was a big one, big sign. And he only started that recently. He would never did that before.
I mean, it's right around the time he was saying, "Oh, I'm speaking as Padre Pio," and that little weird flyer. I was like, really?
Yeah. So he actually began doing stuff like speaking in the voice of Padre Pio, Our Lady. And if you're going to do theater as a priest, you shouldn't be an actor. But even if you, as a priest, you are doing an actor and you're pretending to speak as Padre Pio or Our Lady, well, then, say, I'm just acting here. And I'm using these words that I'm putting in the mouths of these saints to tell a story or tell a tale or do a morality play. And there's nothing really substantially wrong with that. It's not evil in itself, because we have playwrights who writes the same thing.
Yeah.
But that's not what he did. He said, no. He said, this is not Padre Pio speaking. This is not me speaking. This is Padre Pio speaking, and you have to accept what he says. And then he later backtracked it and said, I'm not requiring anyone else to accept what it says, And they did it for Our Lady too. No, he said Our Lady was speaking through him, So there is a wonderful 2-3 volume work by a Spanish Dominican. It's called Mystical Evolution. Tan Books publishes it, which is a complete theologic treatise on mystical theology. And mystical theology is how God interrelates with how the God communicates to the soul.
Mm-hmm.
And talked about all these special charismatic phenomena that have ever occurred in the history of the church with saints. And a saint speaking through someone else is not, it's not one of those things. Why? Because discernment again. God is the God of order and light. The devil is the false god of disorder and confusion. If Padre Pio is speaking through me when he could just appear and speak through himself, that's confusion. That's not order. Or Magigorgia. A lot of people follow, not Magigorgia, but Garabandal. A lot of people follow Garabandal. But in Garabandal, the children take on these grotesque positions and walk backwards you know, and they say, oh, they were being led by the angels. I said, use your discernment. The angels of God behold him face to face. God is infinite beauty and infinite order. So you're telling me they descended from the realm of infinite beauty order and they distorted these children's bodies and made them walk backwards to show that they're from heaven. This doesn't make any sense. That sounds more like they ascended from hell, the reason of disorder, and they twisted these girls' bodies because they hate them and wanted to make them look ridiculous. Doesn't that make more sense? Use a discernment. Or Magigorgia. In Magigorgia, why is it you never see the feet of Our Lady?
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that they actually make statues that hide the feet of Our Lady? Well, if you read in this book by this Dominican, he says, how do you discern that it's really Our Lady or the Archangel Gabriel appearing to you? How do you discern that when you have a visual vision? Because not all the time that you see the saints when they're talking to you. When mystics talk to them, it says the devil can't fake feet.
Mm-hmm.
God allowed Satan to appear like an angel of light, even pretend to be Jesus Christ, but he'll never be able to fake the feet. They will always be hidden in smoke, or they'll be like something strange underneath the feet, like a moving fire or something like that, because God will not allow him to fake everything. Whereas when Saint Raphael appeared to Tobias in the Old Testament, no one knew that was an angel. They all thought it was a young man. And for 6 weeks, he traveled with Tobias to Persia and back. He even went fishing with him. He ate and drank at table. And no one saw anything. They all saw his feet. No one thought it was anything but a young man. They probably saw every part of it because God gave Raphael the permission to completely and perfectly impersonate someone. And that's discernment. So these people will say, no, it's definitely Our Lady. I said, why is there no feet? Why is it here's a book written 50 years before Magigorgia, that says the feet must be visible, otherwise it's of Satan. And there's no feet, and you still don't have the humility to admit that's not of God.
Mm-hmm.
That's not Our Lady. Because you invent 100, my rosary turned to gold. No, your rosary didn't turn to gold. It's just a cheap Chinese rosary, and the outer coating came off because there's only one atom deep. And like, I have a rosary that did the same thing, and I never been to Magigorgia. So, just because that happened doesn't mean in your sweaty hand on a hot day, that's not proper discernment. That's why the church is very cautious about these things. At Lourdes, there were like 15 girls that claimed to have seen Our Lady. Well, the church spent years trying to figure out which one really saw her. It was St. Bernadette. So the church used to use, before Vatican II, before the CIA bought these clerics and got them to follow a false gospel and diluted their minds with all kinds of propaganda and got them to leave the path of bright discernment, the church was extremely judicious. I mean, there were popes that only canonized like 4 saints. And you have John Paul II canonized like 700, and Bergoglio, who's canonized 1200.
Mm-hmm.
Do those 2 men seem to you as prudent as Pius X, who canonized like 12 people? I mean, they more prudent than Pius X?
No.
Doesn't seem so. If you know anything about the lives of those two men, you realize they don't have the same level of prudence, not even natural prudence or supernatural prudence or moral prudence. John Paul II would go on picnics in shorts that didn't even go down half his thigh with women right next to him, and while he was a priest. Is that proper discernment? No, it's not. And anyone who claims it is lying to you. And this is why to call that man a saint doesn't make any sense, because is that an example to follow? No, that's not an example to follow, unless you want priests sleeping with wives. And they wonder why priests are now sleeping with wives, because those pictures around the world used to call that man a saint. Now, canonizations of saints are not infallible acts, okay? And they can err. There are popes that are regarded as saints, people who never were saints and never even existed. So you can't say modern popes can't fall into the same error for different reasons, political ones. So they've canonized every pope. They want to canonize every pope since Pius XII. That's not how it works. You know how many popes were canonized in history? You had to get martyred. Okay. And since the Council of Trent, there was like 5 popes or 4 popes who were canonized, and all of a sudden now every single one, because he's pushing the CIA narrative. No, it does not work that way. Freemasonry isn't holiness. Masonic doctrine isn't the teaching of God. And putting that into practice doesn't make you holy. It's going to make you evil. So some common sense, This doesn't mean we're ultra tradies. We're just absolute Catholics, And this is why discernment is so important. It doesn't matter how many people say it's right. That's not how you determine what's right. Does God say it's right?
Mm-hmm.
Is something good? Well, does it come from God or not? If
Yeah.
it doesn't come from God, it's not good. If you have an apple, a natural apple, not genetically modified, this came from God because God created the apple. But if you have a make-believe wax apple that man made, well, that's not good because it's not from God.
Yeah.
That's the really simple one. Is it from God or not? Is that liturgy from God or is it from a committee?
Yeah.
Did a saint write that, or did some, quacked out theologian from Southern California? Use this common sense, Did that man risk himself for the cause of Christ, or did he risk himself for the Democratic Party? It's this common sense. So when people say you're committing mortal sin unless you vote for a Masonic party, that is blasphemy.
Mm-hmm.
And these people who committed this blasphemy, all the names. We named before in the show, and people won't stop listening to these idiots. But someone like you, AJ, who found the Catholic Party of America, they pay you no time a day, even though it's 100% Catholic.
Yeah.
And they won't even, who was it? Dr. Taylor Marshall, I think in December, he says, I'm going to start a Catholic party called Christ the King Party. You know what his first question was? What kind of flag should we have?
Mm-hmm.
And that was the last thing he ever talked about it.
Yeah.
Because for him, it's a flag. It's not a set of moral principles or theological truths that should be incorporated into society, like in the Catholic Party of America. And
So everybody ran this story. Everybody, from LifeSite News, John Henry Weston, Church Militant. I think even was it Michael Matt maybe about the FBI cracking down on traditional Catholics, but then all of a sudden it was swept under a rug.
yeah, so I had to laugh because Michael Matt, he actually said on his Remnant website, the FBI has done us the greatest favor. So the first thing is why are all these Catholic media sites an echo chamber? Why is it if one starts talking about it, they all start talking about it? There's I don't know I don't recall his actual civil name, but he used to be on Twitter under the name Great Stalin, a Catholic. And he says, look, I was invited to a meeting in South Florida with all these guys, and they told me they have a meeting once a year to decide what to talk about, who to talk about, and who not to talk about and who to blacklist.
Mm-hmm.
And they got really mad at him for dumping that truth. And I don't know. I don't have any personal data to tell you whether what he said was true or not, but I get to think that is the truth. And I have run into this. It's a mafia is what it is. It's a mafia that controls the truth. And if you are not a member of their clique, woe to you if you say anything. The first woe is they won't even say you exist.
Mm-hmm.
So all these groups, the Remnant, 1 Peter 5, EWTN, Taylor Marshall, you don't exist. I was surprised Taylor Marshall talked about the election of Jorge Bergoglio as Pope at the end of January at the Roman Assembly. He only talked about it after the fact. He's never even mentioned my name before. I don't exist. But he did I was absolutely shocked. He mentioned my name. I'm saying, oh, you actually mentioned my name after like 6 years, and I have invited him to debate many times. Never took my debate. And just for the record, I am a cradle Catholic. Taylor Marshall is an Anglican who became a Catholic and was not allowed to practice the priesthood. I mean, he was an Anglican priest, ordained as an Anglican priest, converted to the Catholic faith, and they wouldn't ordain him as a Catholic priest. So, the church knows something about Taylor Marshall, that she wasn't willing to trust. And there are Catholic Anglican priests who get ordained in the Catholic Church and become priests in the Catholic Church, but he wasn't one of them. Okay, so, he has a doctorate, but not from a Catholic institution. So he and I are on equal levels. I don't have a doctorate from a Catholic institution, and neither does he. But, if you listen to what he's saying, it's like, you should give up seed oils for Advent. I burst out laughing. So, I'm not saying we shouldn't practice some penance kinds of fasting. But is that all the end all be alls? But you can see he's just a social media businessman.
Mm-hmm.
He's always trying to catch people's attention. He's always asking questions. He wants social media interaction, and that's how he runs his business. And he raises money for himself and his family. And that in of itself is not immoral. Okay, just like it's not immoral to be an actor or to be, a huckster on the boardwalk in Atlantic City selling Chinese vases. Okay. But Catholics need to use discernment, because that's not the kind of person you get truth from all the time. It might not be even a good source of truth. You go to Jesus Christ for truth.
Mm-hmm.
You go to the doctors and fathers of the church for truth. You go to the canonized saints before Vatican II for the truth, and you see what they say. And then you'll start wondering why no one else is doing that. I mean, what is it? I think it said something like 12 times in the New Testament, beware of novelty.
Mm-hmm.
Or those who are friends of the world are the enemies of God.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone who's like, oh, I want a million followers. Well, why don't you want Jesus to? Why don't want to be the follower of Jesus? Why do you want a million followers? So if you're a friend of the world, you're an enemy of God, then, I mean, about 99% of Catholics have to change their life totally if they're going to live that. But you never hear that verse of scripture read at Mass since Vatican II. Why is that?
Yeah, because see the lectern person, lady, maybe the priest, the bishop, we can't use that because then the money will stop flowing.
There is a passage in the Old Testament that is still included, or at least it was included in the Easter liturgy when I was a young man. I think they got rid of it. It's one of the 12 readings for Easter that's read at the vigil. And the passage is like from Isaiah, and it says, and the Lord says, O Israel, you have become to me like an unclean woman who is menstruating. And it was cut out of the liturgy because that's going to offend women. Because just because a woman's menstruating doesn't mean she's unclean, and doesn't mean she's some kind of moral fault, or, But that's not the point. The point is the symbolism. The point is the symbol. In ancient times, if you got that blood on your hands, you could die of food poisoning. You could die of blood poisoning if you cut yourself with that kind of infection on your hands. So women had to be segregated when they started menstruating. And they had to wash themselves in special ways away from the water everyone else washed, because there was nothing like disinfectants and there was no medicine that could cure you. So, so since women had to suffer that from the time they pass puberty until they get older, they had to be segregated from men, or the men would get sick and die. So it was also a ritual prescription in the temple, because if that kind of a person entered the temple dripping all that kind of stuff, because there was no clothing that could prevent it when it happened, the temple would become unsanitary. People get infected and they would die rather than worship God. So it was sane, it was rational, and it was pragmatic that God, through Moses, who said women who are in that state you can't even touch them before you go to the temple unless you also go through ablutions. But it was a symbol. It's not a moral state. Okay, this has only to do with sanitation, but it was a symbol of sin, because the sinful man who has not repented is like the person who is unclean that can infect everyone.
Yeah. Huh. And I think his internet might be getting a little weak here, folks. Yeah, so going on about an hour, and we haven't yet touched on the stuff about the order. See if it's going to cut off here. So if you look on our show page for today, you'll see the links for helping our studio fund then stuff for our work in Ukraine, and also on how to join the order. Please go there and help out. And I want to sign off right now. Just